New York City, with its towering skyscrapers and constant buzz of activity, was a city where power and ambition thrived. At the heart of Manhattan, on the 35th floor of Kane Industries, sat Michael Lawson, a 33-year-old CEO known for his ruthless business tactics and sharp intellect. His company, one of the leading tech giants in the industry, had earned its place at the top through strategic acquisitions and aggressive expansion. But tonight, as Michael sat in his sleek office overlooking the city, something felt different. He was preparing for an important meeting, one he'd been dreading. Sophia Rivers, the CEO of Rivers Tech, a small but rapidly growing tech company, was coming to discuss a potential partnership. However, Michael knew that this meeting wasn't just about business. It was personal. Sophia Rivers was the daughter of Arthur Rivers, the man who had once been Michael's father's fiercest rival. Years ago, their families had clashed over a failed merger, and Michael's company had emerged victorious, leaving Rivers Tech in ruins. Since then, Michael had made it his mission to expand, to prove his worth, but he had never fully reckoned with the fallout of his victory. Sophia, with her cool demeanor and sharp mind, was the embodiment of everything Michael had destroyed. She was young, driven, and, in his eyes, a constant reminder of the mistakes of the past. But as he prepared for their meeting, Michael couldn't help but wonder what kind of woman she had become. Was she here to avenge her family's loss, or was this purely a business transaction? Michael ran a hand through his dark hair, his sharp grey eyes reflecting the city lights below. He wasn't used to feeling uncertain, but today everything felt different. He straightened his suit, checked his watch, and made his way toward the conference room. Sophia Rivers stood in front of the towering Kane Industries building, her heart pounding with a mix of nervousness and anticipation. At 24, she had already established herself in the tech industry, rising through the ranks of her own company, Rivers Tech, with determination and a fierce work ethic. However, today wasn't just about business. It was about facing the man who had destroyed her family's legacy, the man whose very name haunted her thoughts. Her father, Arthur Rivers, had poured everything into his company, only to lose it all in a bitter legal battle with Michael's company. For years, Sophia had lived in the shadow of that defeat, watching as Michael rose to power while her family fell into obscurity. But now, she wasn't just the daughter of a fallen empire. She was here to make her own way. Sophia straightened her purple-pink glittering dress, a choice she knew was bold but symbolic. She wasn't here to hide or cower. She was here to fight not with anger, but with intellect. She had something to prove, not just to Michael, but to herself, as she stepped into the sleek glass doors of Kane Industries. She pushed the memories of her father aside and focused on the task at hand, a business proposal that could change everything. Michael stood by the large conference table, staring out the window at the city. He could see her now, walking toward him with an air of confidence that made him pause. Sophia Rivers was just as he had imagined, strong, composed, and determined. But what struck him the most was how young she looked. At her age, he had been busy building an empire, but Sophia had the quiet strength of someone who had fought through hardship. Sophia entered the room, her steps sure and steady. She wasn't the type of woman to be intimidated by the likes of him. She had more to prove than he did, and that made him curious. "Ms. Rivers," Michael said, his voice calm and authoritative. "Thank you for coming. I trust you're here to discuss a potential partnership between our companies." Sophia didn't flinch, though she could feel the weight of his gaze. She had heard enough about Michael Lawson to know that he was no easy opponent. Thank you for meeting with me, Mr. Lawson. I'm here to discuss how we can work together to make both our companies more successful. Michael raised an eyebrow. We both know this isn't just about business, Ms. Rivers. This is about family history. Our families have been at odds for years. What makes you think this will be any different? Sophia's expression didn't change. She had prepared for this moment, just as she had prepared for every battle she had fought before. I'm not here for revenge, Mr. Lawson. I'm here because it's time to move past the past. Rivers Tech has potential, and I believe we can achieve something significant by collaborating with your company. Michael studied her for a moment, his gaze intense. She wasn't like most people he dealt with. She wasn't here to beg or plea. She was here to do business. And in that moment, Michael found himself intrigued. I agree, he said slowly. But you need to understand that any partnership with Kane Industries comes with certain expectations. I don't do things halfway. Sophia nodded. Neither do I. The tension between them was thick, but it was also electric. For a brief moment, Michael wondered what it would be like to have her on his side. Not just as a business partner, but as something more. He shook the thought from his mind. This was business, nothing more, as the meeting continued. The conversation shifted to the finer details of the potential partnership. They discussed numbers, strategies, and the future of both companies. But through it all, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Sophia than met the eye. She wasn't just the daughter of a man he had defeated. She was someone who had the potential to reshape the future, someone who could challenge him in ways he hadn't expected. When the meeting ended, Michael stood up, offering his hand to Sophia. I think we can make this work, he said, his voice firm. But remember, it's not just about business. It's about trust. Can I trust you, Ms. Rivers? Sophia looked at his hand, then back at him, her gaze unwavering. I don't trust you yet, Mr. Lawson, but I'm willing to give this a chance. As she left the room, Michael stood there for a moment, watching her go. He had no idea what would come of this partnership, but one thing was certain. This was just the beginning. And perhaps, just perhaps, it would lead to something neither of them could predict. New York City was alive with energy, its streets full of hurried footsteps and bustling crowds. But inside the glass walls of Kane Industries, Michael Lawson sat quietly, looking out over the skyline from his office. The city had always been a place of power and ambition, but today, the weight of the decisions he'd made in the last week felt heavier than ever. He leaned back in his chair, letting the silence settle around him. His mind kept returning to the meeting with Sophia Rivers, the strong, intelligent, and undeniably captivating CEO of Rivers Tech. She had walked into the room with confidence, a calmness that contradicted her position as the daughter of the man who had ruined his family years ago. Michael had never been one to let personal feelings cloud his professional judgment, but something about Sophia had stirred emotions in him that he wasn't ready to confront. She was different, and it scared him. He'd expected a battle, but what he hadn't expected was the quiet strength in her eyes. He'd thought he'd already known everything there was to know about her family after all. He'd grown up in the same cutthroat world. But Sophia wasn't her father. She wasn't someone he could easily dismiss, and that thought kept him awake at night. Sophia Rivers stood at the window of her office, watching the sun slowly dip behind the skyline. She'd spent the entire day going through contracts, emails, and proposals, but her mind kept drifting back to her meeting with Michael Lawson. It was unlike any other business meeting she'd ever had. There was something about the way he carried himself, his calm confidence, his piercing eyes, that made her both wary and intrigued. Sophia had never expected to find herself in the same room with Michael, let alone working with him. The man who had destroyed her family's legacy and left her father bankrupt. The man whose company had taken everything her family had worked for. She hated him for it. She still did, but business was business. And she knew the game well enough to understand that this wasn't about past grudges, it was about the future. Sophia picked up her phone, dialed her assistant, and set up a meeting for the next day. There were still too many unanswered questions, too many things that didn't add up. But the one thing she knew for sure was that she couldn't afford to let emotions get in the way of this deal. As much as she wanted to hate him, she knew that Michael was powerful, and his company was the key to getting Rivers Tech to the next level. The next evening, after another long day at work, Michael decided to take action. He wasn't one to shy away from challenges, and if Sophia thought she could play him, she was mistaken. He needed to understand what drove her. So, he called her. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Hello? Her voice was steady, but there was a hint of something underneath the wariness, perhaps. Sophia, Michael said, his voice calm but firm. I thought we should clear the air after our meeting yesterday. I'd like to discuss the next steps in our partnership. Sophia paused for a moment before responding. I think we've already discussed everything we need to. I'm here to make sure this deal is mutually beneficial. Nothing more. Michael's lips curved into a small smile, though his eyes remained serious. And I'm here to make sure this isn't just a one-sided arrangement. I'm not interested in business deals that don't have substance. If we're going to do this, I want to make sure you're in it for the long haul. I'm in it for the business. Michael, she replied, her voice steady but guarded. Nothing more. You should know that by now. I do, Michael said quietly. But let me make one thing clear. I'm not like the others you've dealt with. I don't play games, and I don't make empty promises. Sophia felt a flutter of unease, but kept her composure. I'm not here to play games either. I want to see results. That's all I'm interested in. Good, Michael replied. Then we understand each other. There was a brief pause before Michael spoke again. There's one more thing I need to tell you, Sophia. Something you might not know. Sophia's interest piqued, but she held her ground. And what's that? I know about your father, and I know the full extent of what happened between our families. His voice remained calm, but the words hit her like a cold wave. Sophia's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. I'm not interested in revisiting the past, Michael. It's gone, and it's done. My father's legacy is my own responsibility now. I know, Michael said softly, but it's important to understand that this isn't just business. It's personal, for both of us. And if we're going to work together, we need to understand each other's past. Sophia clenched her jaw. She knew what he was implying. The betrayal, the business war, the destruction of her family's company, it was all a part of the deal now. She hated it, but she also knew that this was the price of success. I'll consider it. Michael, she said, her voice cold but controlled. But that doesn't mean I'll forget what you've done. Michael didn't respond immediately, and for a moment the silence between them was heavy. You don't have to forget, Sophia, he said finally, but I'm asking you to understand that I have changed, and I need you to believe that. Sophia could hear the sincerity in his voice, but she wasn't sure she could trust him. She didn't know if she ever could. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice firm. "But don't expect me to just forget what happened." "I don't expect you to," Michael replied. "But maybe one day you'll see that we're not so different after all." As they ended the call, Sophia leaned back in her chair, her heart pounding. She had expected to feel victorious, to feel as though she had one-upped Michael. But instead, there was something unsettling in his words, something she couldn't quite place. She didn't trust him. Not yet. But Michael Lawson had a way of getting under her skin, and that, she realized, was something she couldn't ignore. New York City, the heartbeat of ambition, pulsed beneath the skyscrapers as the world outside moved quickly. Inside Kane Industries, the tension had only grown since Michael's conversation with Sophia Rivers. It had been a week since their last meeting, and their dealings had grown more frequent, their exchanges more personal. Every email, every phone call seemed to carry an underlying weight that neither of them had. Anticipated, Michael sat at his desk late one evening, going over the final draft of a new partnership proposal between Rivers Tech and Kane Industries. The contract was nearly ready for signature, but he couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to Sophia, the way she had looked at him, with a mix of defiance and curiosity during their last conversation. Her sharp intelligence, her confidence, and that spark in her eyes. She was unlike anyone he had ever worked with. But beyond that, he couldn't help but wonder why he kept thinking about her. Michael's hand hovered over the proposal, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He knew there was more to her than just the daughter of his father's old rival. She wasn't just a business transaction. There was a complexity to her that he couldn't ignore. And for the first time in his life, Michael wasn't sure how to handle it. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been uncertain about anything. Meanwhile, Sophia was in her office, staring at her computer screen. She had been avoiding her thoughts of Michael for days, but it was impossible. Every time she tried to focus on the business at hand, her mind wandered back to him, to his intense eyes, his calculating demeanor, the sharp way he handled everything. There was a part of her that wanted to hate him, to see him as just another corporate shark who had destroyed her family's future. But another part, one she hated even more, was drawn to him. There was something in him that wasn't so easily dismissed. She pushed the thoughts away, focusing on the financial report in front of her. Rivers Tech was doing well, but the partnership with Kane Industries could be the key to taking the company to the next level. She had no choice but to continue with it. Despite everything, she had to be professional. But every time she saw Michael's name in an email or heard his voice on the phone, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen if she let her guard down just once. It was late one Thursday evening when Michael decided to do something uncharacteristic. He sent an email to Sophia, inviting her to dinner. It wasn't a typical business dinner, but something told him that they needed to talk outside the office, away from the pressure of their professional personas. The message was simple: Sophia, I believe it's time we discussed things in a more personal setting. Dinner tomorrow at La Bernardine, 7 p.m. I'll be there. Sophia stared at the email for a moment. Dinner, she hesitated. It wasn't uncommon for business partners to meet outside of work, but this felt different. She had already agreed to a professional partnership with Michael, but this felt like something else, something deeper. But then she thought about it. They needed to clear the air. They needed to understand each other better if this partnership was ever going to work. She responded with a simple, I'll be there. The next evening, La Bernardine was as elegant as it was quiet. The restaurant was one of New York's finest, known for its serene atmosphere and impeccable service. Michael was already there when Sophia arrived. He stood up as she walked in, his eyes briefly scanning her before he offered a warm if guarded smile. "Good evening, Ms. Rivers," he said, his voice calm and steady, though there was a softness in it that Sophia had never heard before. "Mr. Lawson," she replied, her tone polite but slightly distant. She took a seat across from him, the space between them filled with the tension of the situation. The waiter arrived to take their drink orders, and as he left, Michael looked at Sophia, his gaze steady. "We need to talk about the future of this partnership, but I think it's also time we talked about the past." Sophia raised an eyebrow, her fork paused midway to her mouth. "The past?" Michael nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Yes, I know this business deal is difficult for you, given your family's history with mine. But we can't move forward if we don't acknowledge that history." Sophia's expression tightened. She wasn't sure how much of her father's past she wanted to discuss with him, but she understood that this conversation was inevitable. The tension in her chest grew heavier, but she pushed it aside. "I didn't come here to talk about my family's mistakes, Michael. I'm here to focus on the future of Rivers Tech." Michael's eyes softened slightly. "And I respect that, Sophia. But you and I both know that we can't fully move forward unless we understand where we come from. I can't pretend the past doesn't exist. You can't either." She took a deep breath. She knew what he was saying. There was no getting around it. She couldn't pretend that everything was just business, that her family's rivalry with his wasn't hanging over them. "Fine," she said, her voice steady. "But we're not talking about personal grudges here, Michael. We're talking about a future, and I can't let the past stand in the way of that. For me, for my company." Michael leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. "I understand, but I also want you to know that despite everything, I've never wanted to hurt your family. I've done a lot of things I regret, but this partnership, it's a chance for us to build something that's completely separate from the past." Sophia met his gaze, feeling a flicker of uncertainty. She had always viewed him as the enemy, the man who had taken everything from her family. But here, in this moment, there was something different in his sincerity she hadn't expected. "I don't know if I can ever forgive your family for what happened," she said quietly, the words heavy in the air. "But I'm willing to try, for the sake of this partnership, for the sake of our futures." Michael nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her words. "I don't expect forgiveness, Sophia. I only hope for a chance to prove that I'm not my father, that this is about what's possible, not what's been done." The conversation shifted back to business, but the atmosphere between them had changed. There was still tension, yes, still distrust, but there was also something else, an unspoken understanding that they had both entered into a new chapter, one that was uncertain but full of possibility. As they finished dinner, neither of them mentioned the past again, but both of them knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. The partnership was far from settled, and the ghosts of their families would continue to linger. But for the first time in a long time, Sophia was willing to take a chance on the future, and Michael was willing to prove that the man he once was could be left behind. It had been 2 weeks since the dinner at La Bernardine, and things at Kane Industries and Rivers Tech were beginning to settle into a routine. The partnership was officially underway, and despite their rocky start, the two companies were making progress. The board members of both companies seemed satisfied with the direction they were heading, and the media hadn't been able to spin the deal into anything negative yet. But for Michael Lawson, the internal conflict was only growing stronger. The more time he spent with Sophia Rivers, the more he found himself torn between his business mind and something deeper, something that he couldn't ignore. He had promised himself that this partnership would only be professional. He had told her that he wouldn't let his past affect their future. But every time he looked at her, every time their paths crossed, his thoughts wandered to places he wasn't ready to go. Sophia, for her part, was struggling as well. She had told herself she could separate business from personal feelings. But Michael was a constant presence in her life now, and despite her attempts to keep their interactions strictly professional, she found herself thinking about him more and more. It wasn't just his power, his confidence, it was the vulnerability she had glimpsed in him that night at dinner. The man behind the CEO for Carde, Sophia, sat in her office, reviewing the quarterly financial report for Rivers Tech. The numbers were good, but her mind kept drifting. She couldn't help but think back to the last conversation she had with Michael. His words echoed in her mind. "I want to prove I'm not my father." It was something he had said that night, and despite her skepticism, she couldn't shake the feeling that he might actually mean it. The door to her office opened without a knock, and Michael stepped inside. He was wearing a tailored suit, his expression serious. "We need to talk about the upcoming merger," he said, his voice firm. But there was something in a trace of softness that caught her off guard. Sophia stood up, trying to mask the flutter in her chest. "Of course. What about it? The final details need to be ironed out. But I've been thinking," he paused, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. "We should do this right. No more playing it safe. If we're really going to make this work, we need to take risks." Together, Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She had heard him speak about taking risks before, but something about his tone now felt ... different. He wasn't just talking about business anymore. Was he? "I don't know what you're getting at, Michael," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "But this partnership is already risky enough. If we're going to do this, we can't afford to make any more mistakes." Michael stepped closer, the distance between them closing with every word he spoke. "I don't mean mistakes, Sophia. I mean, we need to take a leap of faith. In each other." She froze, her breath caught in her throat. He was dangerously close now, his presence overwhelming. The tension was palpable. "What do you mean by that?" Before he could answer, there was a knock on the door, and a voice called out, "Mr. Lawson, Ms. Rivers, the meeting's about to start." Michael's gaze never left Sophia's, but he took a step back. "We'll talk more later," he said, his voice low. "This isn't over." Sophia nodded, her mind racing as he walked out of the room. What did he mean by that? She asked herself. She couldn't deny that the chemistry between them was undeniable, but she wasn't sure she could trust him. Not yet. And yet, a small part of her wanted to. Later that day, as Sophia sat through another round of board meetings, her mind kept drifting back to the brief encounter with Michael. She couldn't explain it, but every interaction with him seemed to leave her more confused than before. Was it just business, or was there something more? She had no answers, only questions that kept piling up. That evening, after the meetings had ended, she sat alone in her apartment, sipping her wine. Her phone buzzed, and she looked down to see a message from Michael. "Michael Lawson. I know things are complicated right now, but we can make this work. Let's talk tomorrow. 7 p.m. Sophia stared at the message for a moment before typing a response. Sophia Rivers. Fine. Tomorrow at 7, but this is strictly about business, Michael. Nothing more. She hit send, and immediately regretted the sharpness in her words. But the truth was, she wasn't sure she could handle anything more than business with him. Not yet. The next evening, Sophia arrived at the restaurant Michael had chosen. It was a sleek, modern place, quiet, intimate, the kind of venue Michael always seemed to prefer. As she walked in, she spotted him sitting at a corner table, a glass of wine in front of him. He looked up as she approached, his eyes softening for just a moment before he stood to greet her. "Ms. Rivers," Michael said, his voice calm but with a hint of warmth. "Thank you for coming." Sophia offered a small smile as she sat down. "Let's get this over with, Mr. Lawson. We have a lot to discuss." "I agree," Michael replied, his eyes locked on hers. "But I think there's something we need to address before we talk business." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. "The tension between us. We can't keep pretending like it doesn't exist." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. Was he really going to go there? "Michael," she said, her voice firm, "we're here to discuss the merger." "That's it, I know," he said, his expression serious. "But the truth is, I don't want to just talk about business anymore. I want more than that." Sophia's mind raced. More? What did he mean by that? She wasn't ready for this, but there was something in his eyes that made her hesitate before she could respond. The waiter arrived, and the conversation shifted back to business. But as the night went on, the air between them grew heavier with unspoken words. They both knew that something had shifted, but neither of them was willing to fully admit it. The days following their dinner had been tense and filled with unspoken words. The partnership between Kane Industries and Rivers Tech was progressing, but the real challenge, the one neither Michael nor Sophia had prepared for, was the growing pull between them. Every time they met, the line between business and personal blurred a little more. And the deeper they got into the merger, the more their feelings seemed to complicate everything. Sophia sat in her office late one night, reviewing a contract that was crucial for the final stages of the merger. The office was quiet, except for the soft tapping of her fingers on the keyboard. She had always prided herself on being focused, on keeping her emotions out of the equation. But ever since her encounters with Michael, her concentration had faltered. Every time she looked at the paperwork, she saw his face, the way he had looked at her during their last conversation. The intensity in his eyes, it haunted her. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. She couldn't deny it anymore. She was drawn to him, despite everything, despite the hatred she had once felt for him, despite the past. He wasn't just the ruthless CEO of Kane Industries anymore. He was someone else, someone she wasn't sure she knew how to handle. Her phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from Michael Lawson. "We need to talk. Urgent. Can you meet tomorrow at noon?" She stared at the message for a moment. The words urgent and meet sent a chill down her spine. Was this about the merger? Or something more? Sophia Rivers, of course. "See you tomorrow." The next day they met at a small cafe just outside the city. The setting was casual, but there was no mistaking the tension between them as they sat down. Michael, usually so composed, seemed on edge, his fingers tapping restlessly on his coffee cup. "You've been avoiding me," he said, breaking the silence first, his voice laced with frustration. Sophia raised an eyebrow. "I've been busy, Michael." "You know that. You've been distant," he countered, leaning forward, his gaze intense. "This isn't just about the merger anymore, is it?" Sophia felt a pang of anxiety. Her mind was racing, but she kept her composure. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Michael said slowly, his voice dropping a few octaves, "that I know there's something more between us. I've tried to ignore it, but I can't anymore." Sophia froze. Her heart beat faster, but she refused to let him see how affected she was. She was not going to let her emotions take control, not now. "You're mistaken," she said firmly, her voice steady. "This is just business. We've been over this." Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't think you understand, Sophia. I've worked my whole life to control everything around me, but when I'm around you, nothing feels in control anymore, and I don't know how to handle it." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. She had always seen Michael as a man who thrived on control, but this was different. This was vulnerability. "I don't want to be just another deal to you, Michael," she said quietly, her eyes narrowing. "I can't let myself be used again." Michael's gaze softened, and for the first time, he looked away. "I'm not using you," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't know how else to say this, but I can't stop thinking about you. I know I'm not supposed to feel this way, not after everything, but I can't deny it anymore. I don't want to be the man I was. I want to be someone you can trust." Sophia felt a surge of emotions rise up in her, but she kept them in check. She had no idea how to react to this sudden confession. Michael, the cold, calculating CEO she had always feared, was opening up to her in a way she hadn't expected. But what did that mean? What did it change? "I can't just forget the past, Michael," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I can't forget what you did to my family." "I know," Michael replied, his tone heavy with regret, "and I don't expect you to. But I want you to know that I'm not that person anymore. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to show you who I really am. To show you that I'm not just about power and business, that I can be more." Sophia looked at him, trying to read him, trying to make sense of the man sitting across from her. Could she trust him? Could she believe that he had changed? She didn't know. She wanted to. She wanted to believe in the man sitting in front of her. But the scars of the past were too deep. She had spent so many years building her life, her career, and she wasn't sure she could risk it all for a man who had destroyed everything she once knew. "I need time, Michael," she said softly. "I need time to think about everything." Michael nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll give you all the time you need, Sophia. But just know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Later that night, as Sophia sat alone in her apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about Michael's words. He had opened up to her in a way she hadn't expected. He was no longer just the man who had ruined her family's business. He was a man who was willing to change, to take risks for her. But was it enough? She didn't have the answers yet. But one thing was certain. This was far from over. The road ahead would be messy, full of complications and uncertainties. But for the first time, Sophia felt like she had a choice. A real choice. And she wasn't ready to make it just yet. The city lights of New York shimmered below as Sophia Rivers stared out of her office window, trying to focus on the reports in front of her. It had been a long week, and the pressure of the merger was beginning to take its toll. Her father's legacy loomed in the back of her mind, but it wasn't just that. The growing complexity of her relationship with Michael Lawson was something she couldn't ignore. Any more since their dinner, Things between them had only gotten more intense. Michael's openness had thrown her off, and every interaction now felt charged with an energy she couldn't quite place. She had told herself that this was just business, but deep down, she knew that there was more at play. She had spent the past week denying her feelings, convincing herself that she was only drawn to him because of the business. But it was getting harder to ignore. The phone buzzed on her desk, interrupting her thoughts. She looked down to see a text from Michael Lawson. "We need to meet. 8 p.m. tonight. It's urgent." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She had known this day was coming. Michael had been unusually quiet for the past few days, and now the urgency in his message unsettled her. What was it this time? Was it about the merger? Or was it about something more personal? She quickly replied, "Sophia Rivers. I'll be there at 8 p.m. The two of them met at the Plaza, one of New York's most exclusive hotels. The ambience was elegant, the dim lighting adding to the sense of secrecy in the air. Sophia walked into the private room where Michael was already waiting. He stood up when she entered, his usual confidence replaced by a rare look of concern. "Thank you for coming, Sophia," Michael said, his voice low. Almost apologetic, Sophia nodded, though her anxiety was building. "You said it was urgent. What's going on?" Michael gestured for her to sit. "I wish this were just about the business, but it's not," he said, running a hand through his hair. "There's something you need to know. Something I should have told you sooner." Sophia's stomach churned. She had been expecting this. She had been waiting for the moment when the past would catch up to them. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with tension. Michael took a deep breath, looking as though he were grappling with something heavy. "It's about the merger, and about my family." Sophia's heart skipped. The mention of his family made everything feel personal again. "What about your family?" Michael hesitated, then looked directly at her. "I've been keeping something from you. Something I should have shared with you earlier. The truth is, my father's company was responsible for the downfall of your father's business. But there's more. I wasn't just an innocent bystander." Sophia's face turned pale. Her father had always spoken of the corporate war between him and Michael's father, but she had never known the full extent of it. Michael's revelation hit her like a blow to the chest. "What do you mean you weren't an innocent bystander?" she asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. Michael's eyes darkened, and for the first time, Sophia saw something raw in him: guilt, regret. "I wasn't just an observer of what happened. I was part of the decision-making process. I chose to take the actions that led to your father's company collapsing. I thought it was just business at the time. But it was more than that. It was personal, and it destroyed everything your father worked for." The weight of his words settled over Sophia like a suffocating fog. She couldn't breathe. "You," she choked, her voice faltering. "You were the one who made those decisions. You took down my father's company. You ruined everything for him." Her voice rose in anger. "And now you expect me to sit here and pretend it's all fine." Michael stood up, his voice calm but filled with emotion. "I never wanted to hurt you, Sophia. I never wanted to destroy your family. What happened, what I did it, was a mistake, one I deeply regret. But I've spent my entire career trying to bury that past. I thought I could outrun it, but I can't anymore. I need you to know the truth." Sophia stood up, her emotions a whirlwind. "You don't get to just apologize for that. You don't get to come in here and tell me how sorry you are after everything your family has done to mine." She paced across the room, her chest tightening. "I've spent my whole life trying to rebuild, trying to separate myself from what you did. And now you're telling me that you were part of it all along." Her voice broke with emotion, the walls she had carefully built around herself cracking. Michael stepped closer, his face full of regret. "I know you can't forgive me, and I don't expect that. I just needed you to understand why I've been so driven, why I've been so distant. It's because of the guilt, because I know I'm the one who tore your world apart." Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "I don't know what to say to you, Michael. You've destroyed everything, and now you expect me to just ... move on, to accept your apology." Michael's voice softened. "No, I don't expect you to forget, but I'm asking for a chance to make things right. For both of us." For a long moment, Sophia didn't speak. She couldn't. Her heart was a tangled mess of emotions, anger, confusion, betrayal, but also something else, ... something she couldn't quite name. She took a deep breath. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Michael," she said, her voice quiet, "but I'll consider it. I'll give you one chance. But you have to prove to me that you mean what you're saying." Michael nodded, his face serious. "I will, I'll prove it. I just need you to give me the chance." Sophia didn't say anything more. She turned and walked out of the room, her mind racing, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision she had just made as she left the restaurant and stepped into the cold night air. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change, but she wasn't sure if it was for better or for worse. It had been a week since their conversation in the restaurant. Sophia had agreed to give Michael a chance, but the weight of that decision hung heavily over her every time they spoke. The tension between them was palpable, but the professional partnership they were trying to build couldn't afford to fail. Yet, as much as she tried to focus on the business side, it was impossible to ignore the pull between them, the lingering glances, the moments when their conversations drifted beyond what was strictly professional. Sophia had been trying to keep her emotions in check, but every time Michael entered a room, she felt a wave of uncertainty flood over her. She wasn't sure what it was about him, but she was beginning to realize that her feelings weren't as straightforward as she had convinced herself they were. She had told herself that this was just business, that she could keep everything separate, but she couldn't deny that something deeper was stirring inside her. On the other hand, Michael had done everything in his power to bury his past, to focus on the present. But no matter how much he tried to concentrate on the merger, on making Kane Industries and Rivers Tech a success, he couldn't shake the feeling that his past was closing in on him. The guilt, the regret, was all starting to resurface. And what made it worse was the fact that Sophia was right there, the living reminder of everything he had done. He wasn't sure if he was doing the right thing anymore. Was this partnership a way to make amends, or was it just another way to control the situation? Sophia sat at her desk late in the evening, staring at the contract in front of her. Her fingers hovered over the keys, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She had spent the last few days finalizing the details of the merger between Rivers Tech and Kane Industries, but her mind kept drifting back to Michael. She hadn't heard from him much since their dinner. A few emails here and there, some minor adjustments to the merger details, but nothing more personal. And perhaps that was for the best. The more she saw him, the more confusing her feelings became. She had made a decision to separate her emotions from her professional life, but she wasn't sure she could keep that promise much longer. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced down at the message. Michael Lawson, we need to meet. Something's come up. Sophia's heart skipped. Something's come up. It could mean anything, an issue with the merger, or something more personal. She felt a sense of unease settle in her chest. Sophia Rivers, where and when? Michael Lawson, tonight. 9 p.m. I'll text you the address. Sophia put her phone down, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew she had to go. If this was about the business, she couldn't afford to let personal feelings get in the way. But what if it wasn't? What if this was about them? At 9 p.m., Sophia arrived at a small, upscale bar in the East Village. The atmosphere was intimate, dimly lit with soft jazz playing in the background. Michael was already there, sitting at a corner table, his eyes scanning the room before they landed on her. He stood as she approached, his expression serious but tired. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly, as she took a seat across from him. "I know it's late, but this couldn't wait." Sophia looked at him, waiting for him to continue. "What's going on, Michael?" He ran a hand through his hair, his gaze shifting from the table to her. "There's something I didn't want to tell you, not yet. But I think you have a right to know." Sophia's stomach tightened. She had braced herself for this. "What is it?" Michael hesitated for a moment before speaking. "It's about my father. And your father's company. The merger wasn't the only thing at stake when we started this. There's something I've found out recently, something I should have told you earlier." Sophia leaned forward, her heart pounding. "What are you talking about?" "Your father. He wasn't the only one involved in the downfall of my family's company. There's a third-party competitor, and I didn't realize it until recently, but they've been manipulating both of our families for years. They've been playing us against each other." Sophia felt her world shift. "You're saying that someone else was behind all of this?" Michael nodded slowly. "I've been investigating it, trying to get to the bottom of it. I thought it was just a business rivalry, but now I see it was orchestrated. Someone else has been pulling the strings." Sophia's mind was spinning. She had spent years thinking she knew the full story, but now it seemed like the truth was far more complicated. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know yet," Michael said, his tone grim. "But I'm going to find out, and I'm going to make them pay." Sophia leaned back in her chair, processing everything. This wasn't just about business anymore. This wasn't just about their families. There was a deeper conspiracy at play, one that neither of them could have anticipated. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked quietly. "What's your plan?" Michael met her gaze, his eyes burning with determination. "Because you deserve to know the truth, and I need you to trust me. We have to work together on this. I can't do it alone." Sophia's chest tightened. She had spent years hating Michael for what his family had done, but now she was starting to see him in a different light. He wasn't just the man who had destroyed her father's legacy. He was someone who was willing to fight for the truth, for justice. And for the first time, she wasn't sure where she stood with him. "I don't know if I can trust you, Michael," she said, her voice wavering. "But I can't ignore this. We have to get to the bottom of it." As the night wore on, the weight of their conversation settled between them like a thick fog. There was still a long road, ahead, a road filled with unanswered questions, potential dangers, and the ever-growing complexity of their relationship. But one thing was certain: everything had just changed, and they were in this together, whether they liked it or not. Sophia stood up, the cool air of the night hitting her as she stepped outside. She looked at Michael, who stood next to her, his face serious. "This isn't over," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We have a lot of work to do." Michael nodded, his gaze fixed on her. "We'll get through this, together, for the first time." Sophia felt a flicker of hope that they could somehow overcome everything that had happened between their families. And maybe, just maybe, even something more. The following week was a blur for Sophia Rivers. The promise she made to Michael Lawson to help uncover the truth about the third party who had been manipulating both their families felt like a weight she wasn't sure she was ready to carry. Every conversation, every meeting felt like they were digging deeper into a rabbit hole with no clear way out. They had their suspicions, but so far the evidence was thin. No concrete leads. No one they could trust. The only thing that was clear was that whoever was behind the plot had access to both of their families' most private affairs, and that was more dangerous than they realized. Sophia sat in her office, staring at her computer screen, but her mind wasn't on the numbers. She couldn't stop thinking about the last meeting with Michael. His words had stuck with her. "We'll get through this. Together," it was a promise. But promises were hard to believe when the lines between right and wrong blurred so easily. She wanted to trust him, wanted to believe that his intentions were pure, but she couldn't forget the past. She couldn't forget what had happened to her family. No matter how much he claimed to be different from his father, her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Michael Lawson. "We need to meet." Something big came up. 9 p.m., my place. Sophia hesitated for a moment before typing her reply. "Sophia Rivers, I'll be there." The apartment was quieter than Sophia expected when she arrived. Michael's place was sleek, modern, with large windows offering a stunning view of the city lights. The atmosphere was cold, detached, just like Michael himself. But tonight, there was something different in the air. Michael greeted her at the door, his usual sharp, authoritative presence subdued. His eyes were darker than usual, filled with a quiet urgency. "Sophia, I'm glad you came," he said, his voice laced with a tension she hadn't heard before. "This isn't just about business anymore. We're in deeper than we thought." Sophia raised an eyebrow, stepping into the apartment. "What do you mean? What's going on?" Michael motioned for her to sit. "I've been getting strange calls, threats, anonymous messages. It's clear now that someone doesn't want us to get to the truth. Someone wants to stop this investigation." Sophia's heart sank. The stakes were higher than she had anticipated. "Who would do that? Who's trying to stop us?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, but her hands clenched in her lap. "I don't know yet, but I've started looking into a few people, some old contacts from my father's company. It's possible someone from the past is trying to cover their tracks." Michael's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of fear in his expression. "I don't know who to trust anymore." Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. She had always known that digging into the past would come with consequences, but now it was starting to feel like they were opening a door they could never close. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice a mix of determination and worry. "We keep going. We don't stop," Michael said, his voice firm but edged with uncertainty. "But I need you to be careful, Sophia. If anyone knows what we're up to, things are going to get a lot worse." Sophia nodded, but the weight of the situation was starting to sink in. "I didn't ask for this," she said quietly, her voice shaky. "I didn't ask for any of it." "I know," Michael replied, his voice softening. "And I'm sorry. But we're in this together now. We can't back out. Not when we're this close." Sophia looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for any hint of deceit. What was he really feeling? What did he really want? She had always been wary of him, but tonight she saw a different side of Michaela's side that was vulnerable, unsure. It was a side she hadn't expected, and it made her second-guess everything she thought she knew about him. "I need time to think," she said, standing up from the couch. "This is bigger than I thought, and I need some space to process it." Michael didn't argue. He simply nodded, though there was a flash of disappointment in his eyes. "I understand, but don't take too long, Sophia. We can't afford to waste any more time." Sophia left the apartment with a heavy heart. She didn't know what was scarier, the idea of continuing down this path with Michael, or the thought of walking away and leaving everything unresolved. The next few days were a blur of late-night meetings, phone calls, and digging through old records. The deeper they went, the more dangerous it became. Threats began to escalate, anonymous packages, warning messages, and even a near accident as Sophia left her apartment. She didn't know who was behind it, but she couldn't ignore it anymore. Someone was watching them, and they were getting closer. But as the days went on, the bond between Michael and Sophia only grew stronger. They had become partners in more than just business. Their shared goal was no longer about revenge or power, it was about survival. And somewhere along the way, they had started to rely on each other. That night, Michael called her again. This time, there was no more hesitation in his voice. "We're ready. I've got enough information to go after the person behind all of this. It's time we confront them." Sophia felt a mix of fear and excitement. This was at the moment where everything would either fall into place or fall apart. She had no choice now but to trust Michael. Trust that together they could face whatever was coming. "Let's do it," she said, her voice firm. "I'm in." The days leading up to the final confrontation were tense. The investigation into the mysterious third party behind the destruction of both Michael Lawson's and Sophia Rivers' families had led them to a chilling realization. The people they were dealing with were far more powerful than they had imagined. Every lead they followed only seemed to reveal more questions, more threats, and more danger. Sophia sat in her office late at night, staring at a file in front of her. The documents were scattered across her desk's financial records, company emails, and encrypted messages that they had uncovered. But even with all the evidence they had gathered, the truth still felt just out of reach. They had tracked down several names, but nothing was concrete. And the deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. Sophia had received anonymous threats, warning her to stop the investigation or face the consequences. And yet, she couldn't stop. She couldn't back down now. But now, everything was about to change. Michael had been quieter than usual over the past few days, his mind consumed with the same information that had been haunting Sophia. He had spent countless hours poring over the details of their investigation, trying to find the missing piece that would tie everything together. But as the hours turned into days, the pressure had started to mount. The threats against them were becoming more frequent, more personal, and the fear that had once seemed like a distant possibility was now becoming a reality. Tonight, he couldn't afford to wait any longer. It was time to make a move. He dialed Sophia's number, his hands shaking slightly as the phone rang. She answered on the third ring. "What is it, Michael?" she asked, her voice tired but sharp. "We have to act now," Michael said, his tone resolute. "We've tracked the people behind this, and I think we finally have a lead. It's time to confront them, once and for all." Sophia paused, her heart racing. "Are you sure? What if we're wrong? What if we're walking into a trap?" "I don't think we have a choice anymore," Michael replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "They've been toying with us long enough. We can't let them control us any longer. We need to take action before it's too late." Sophia exhaled slowly, knowing that this was the moment they'd been building toward. She knew that there was no turning back. "I'm in," she said, her voice firm. "Where do we start?" They arranged to meet in a secluded location outside of the city, away from prying eyes. The place was quiet, unassuming, a perfect place to discuss their next steps without the risk of being overheard. As they arrived, the air between them felt charged, the weight of the situation pressing down on both of them. Michael's usual calm demeanor was replaced by an intensity that Sophia hadn't seen before. "This is it," Michael said, glancing around as they walked into the building. "We confront them here. We get the answers we've been searching for." Sophia nodded, her jaw clenched. She could feel the weight of the decision she was about to make. This wasn't just about business anymore. This wasn't just about revenge or power. This was about survival. The building was dimly lit, a stark contrast to the bustling energy of the city just outside. The air was thick with anticipation as they made their way through the empty halls. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the walls, a reminder of how far they had come and how much was at stake. When they reached the final room, Michael turned to Sophia, his expression hardening. "Are you ready for this?" Sophia took a deep breath, steeling herself. "As ready as I'll ever be." They opened the door inside. A group of men sat around a table, their faces obscured in the shadows. At the head of the table sat Arthur Rivers, Sophia's estranged father. The man she had once looked up to, the man who had built her family's empire, and the man who had fallen from grace. Behind him stood several other figures, all of them unknown to Michael and Sophia. But one thing was clear: these were the people behind the conspiracy that had torn their families apart. "Sophia," Arthur said, his voice low and cold, "I see you've brought Mr. Lawson with you." "How typical." Michael stepped forward, his eyes locked on Arthur. "It's over, Rivers," he said, his voice low but filled with authority. "We know what you've been doing. You can't hide behind your lies anymore." Arthur's lips curled into a cold smile. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you're dealing with. This game has only just begun." Sophia clenched her fists, anger bubbling up inside her. "You ruined everything," she spat. "You destroyed our family, and for what? Power, greed." Arthur's expression remained unchanged. "Sometimes sacrifices must be made in the name of progress. Your family was just in the way." Michael stepped forward again, his voice unwavering. "Not anymore." The confrontation escalated quickly. Words were exchanged, accusations were thrown, and the tension in the room was palpable. But just as the situation seemed to spiral out of control, one of the men at the table stood up, revealing himself to be the true mastermind behind the conspiracy, Victor Huxley, an old rival of both Michael and Arthur. "I think you've both underestimated me," Victor said, his voice calm and controlled. "And I think it's time to end this little charade before either Michael or Sophia could react." Huxley's men began to move, toward them, weapons drawn. The room erupted into chaos. In the midst of the violence, Michael and Sophia fought back, working together with a newfound understanding of what they had to lose. In the end, they managed to subdue Huxley and his men, but not without consequence. The fight had left both of them exhausted, physically and emotionally. As they stood over the defeated enemies, the reality of what they had just done set in. "We did it," Michael said, his voice ragged. Sophia looked at him, her heart pounding. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for the past, Michael," she said quietly, "but I can't deny that we've come this far together." Michael met her gaze, his expression softening. "I never asked you to forgive me, Sophia. I only asked for a chance to prove that I could be better." As they left the building, the night air felt cooler than before. But there was a sense of relief in the air now. They had uncovered the truth, fought the battle, and won. But as they walked side by side, neither of them could shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. They had faced down their pasts together, but what about the future? The city of New York glittered with its usual vibrance, but for Sophia and Michael, everything felt different now. They had been through a storm, physically and emotionally, and yet they were still standing. The battle against Victor Huxley and the dark conspiracy that had brought their families into conflict was over, but the aftermath left them with more questions than answers. Sophia sat in her apartment, staring at the same files she'd been looking at for weeks. The merger was almost complete, and Rivers Tech was finally recovering from the blow that Michael's family had dealt them. But now, as she thought about everything that had happened, everything she'd learned, she was left with an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. The weight of what she had been through with Michael was too much to ignore. They had fought side by side, but had they truly changed? Could she really move past the history between their families? Could she trust him, despite everything he had done? She was interrupted by a knock on her door. It was Michael. "Sophia, can we talk?" he asked, standing in the doorway. His face was tense, his expression soft but wary. Sophia sighed, standing up from the couch. "What do you want to talk about, Michael?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. She had a million thoughts racing through her mind, but she wasn't sure where to start. The truth was, she wasn't sure what she wanted either. Michael stepped inside, his gaze immediately locking onto hers. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about everything, and I know things have been ... complicated. But I need you to understand something." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" she asked, her heart beginning to beat faster. "I can't undo the past. I can't change the mistakes my family made, and I can't change what I did to you and your family. But I can promise you that I'm not the same man I was before," Michael said, his voice earnest. "I've learned from everything that's happened, and I've learned a lot from you, Sophia. You've made me realize that there's more to life than business and power. There's more to life than winning. You've changed me." Sophia felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to believe him. She really did. But could she? She had spent so much time building walls around herself. So many years of trying to protect her heart from the people who had hurt her, and now Michael was asking her to let those walls come down. "I don't know if I can just forget everything." "Michael," she said softly, her voice wavering, "you can't expect me to forgive you just because you've changed. My family, my father, they've suffered because of your actions, and that's not something that can be fixed with a few words. I don't expect forgiveness." "Sophia," Michael said quietly, his gaze never leaving hers. "But I do hope you'll give me a chance to prove that I'm not who I was before. I've already proven that I can be more than a businessman. But I want to prove that I can be more than just someone from your past. I want to be someone you can count on." Sophia swallowed hard, her emotions in turmoil. She had spent so much time hating him, so much time convincing herself that she could never forgive him for what he had done to her family. And now, here he was, standing in front of her, offering something she wasn't sure she could accept. "What are you asking me to do, Michael?" she finally asked, her voice almost a whisper. "I'm asking you to trust me," Michael said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I'm asking you to let me show you that I can be the person you need me to be, not just in business, but in life. I know it's not easy, and I know it's going to take time. But I'm asking you to give me a chance." Sophia looked at him for a long moment. She could feel the weight of his words, the sincerity in his eyes. But even as her heart ached with uncertainty, she realized that the only way forward was to trust herself and to trust him. At least a little bit. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said, her voice trembling. "But I'm willing to try." Michael's face softened. He took a step closer, his hand reaching for hers. "That's all I can ask for," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't expect you to change overnight, but I will do whatever it takes to earn your trust." For a moment, they stood there in silence, the air between them thick with emotion. Sophia's mind was still racing, but there was something comforting in Michael's presence. She wasn't sure what the future held for them, but she knew that they had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The days that followed were filled with more meetings, more work and more late nights, but Sophia and Michael found a new rhythm in their interactions. The business partnership continued to thrive, but their personal connection grew stronger, too. They started spending more time together outside of work, casual dinners, late-night walks through the city, and quiet conversations where they could be themselves without the weight of the world on their shoulders. Despite their growing closeness, Sophia couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of her mind. She still wasn't sure if she could fully forgive Michael, or if she was simply settling into a relationship born out of necessity. But one thing was clear. She was beginning to open up to him in a way she hadn't with anyone in a long time. And as they continued to work together, as they continued to face the challenges of merging their two companies, Sophia realized that she didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't need to know exactly where things were going, as long as they were moving forward together.